each of our CTA events, we start off with a land acknowledgement. I myself, right now, I'm in the Nissen Miwok folk in Sacramento area. I want to give thanks to them for allowing me to be on their land. I would like to pay homage to their past, their present, and their future. And let us all remember that wherever we are in California, or throughout the United States, that is, that we are on native land. So I ask that you take a moment to just reflect on where you are and find out more about your native tribes and folk where you're from. So thank you very much. I have to tell you is that I am so honored to be here with you folks, and I hope that you really truly grab from this experience that this is not something that's new. This is something that's been going on, but it's given us a different opportunity to truly bring together a group of educators and leaders so that we can have a better grasp on what community schools is. Since 2021, CTA has had chapters that have been involved in the NEA Midwest Academy Strategic Campaign for community schools. And currently we have about 20 odd schools that are involved in this process. I'm hoping that we will be able to expand on this in the coming years. In June of this past year, the governor approved $3 billion in additional funding for community schools. And that is a very significant number, and it offers significant opportunities for us to look and see how we can transform public education, because this is what it's supposed to be, transformative. But we can't allow it to be from a top-down mentality and process. We need to make sure that we are a part of the process, and we are doing all that we can to ensure that, when people say wraparound services, that is just not what the district tends or the county tends to believe wraparound services are, but it's what the community truly feels is needed for the students, for the community, so that they can really thrive and give our students what they need according to where they are within the state. So I have great pride in having David Goldberg lead this effort along with our wonderful staff. And I take honor in introducing him at this moment, because you're going to be blown away with the information that you will be receiving. So David, may I pass it to you? And thank you again. And again, thank you, staff, for being a part of this terrific process that we're going to go through.
And we thank you all. We know it's been just a crazy, incredible, overwhelming, sometimes demoralizing time these last, I want to say a few weeks, but last couple of years have been overwhelming. And so we know that a lot of our focus has been, frankly, on survival. But part of the reason why we really want to bring this to you today, this panel and this briefing on community schools, is that we really believe in our heart that we all collectively deserve more than just to survive, that our students deserve more than just to survive. And while sometimes we say we can't wait to get back to the good old days, we also know that these good old days were also not meeting our needs, right? Our most basic needs were not being met. Too much top-down decision-making, too much overwhelm, too much testing, too much test-driven stuff, too much stuff disconnecting us from our members in the community. And so we're really trying to see this community schools program and this unprecedented $3 billion investment in community schools. By the way, that's the single biggest investment in the history of this nation in community schools right now, the state of California. But we know that we have to get this right. Community schools is a model that many of us have been waiting for decades, right? Maybe we didn't call it community schools, but the community school, the pillars of community schools, by the way, all these pillars are on our website at cta.go/community schools. The pillars of community schools, which, by the way, people want to just frame it simply as wraparound services. But community schools is also about this bottom-up decision-making, democratic processes where us and the communities are making decisions about curricular issues, about all kinds of issues of the running of our school. It includes wraparound services, but it also includes decision making around far broader issues. And so it's a real reorientation of, it says basically, don't do anything about us without us. That we and the parents and the community are really central to really developing the education system that we need. Please do look again on our cta.org/community schools for a bunch of great resources, including some of the pillars of community schools, because again, people so often want to narrowly frame this. And just as I transition, last thing I want to say, all of us, many of us who have dedicated our lives and waited for moments where we could actually be part of this decision-making process, where the schools could be oriented towards our needs and needs of our students and not top-down, test-driven curriculum. We know that that doesn't happen overnight. And so while we see community schools as a vehicle, we know that we have to also put a lot of energy into this. And it really takes a lot of power to make that happen, right? And it's good old-fashioned power that you're going to hear some of our folks on the panel talking about, of really engaging with our members, talking to them about their aspirations for education and connecting that to our bargaining, connecting that to broader fights and struggles in our district and through community schools. But it's also a new kind of power, an exciting kind of power. We connect those struggles also with our students and our community in a way that's kind of been the third rail, right? Where we now collectively go in and put demands on our district. And this can be collaborative, of course, with our district, but even collaboration means that we have to be engaged deeply and we have to bring that kind of power to the decision-making process at our work sites and our school sites. And so with that, I want to tell you that we have a panel, an exciting panel today. We've been doing a number of panels. This panel, we've kind of been listening to feedback. And so what we've decided to do today is come up with a panel that's from all over California. So, and also are in really different places around developing their community schools model. We want to show that what this looks like at different stages. So we'll have, for example, Kyle Weinberg from SDEA, who spent the last few years at really building a coalition in their local around community schools. Then we'll have Rebecca Ledoux from Twin Rivers, who's really talking about the work of incorporating this work very concretely into their bargaining, into their contract campaigns. David Navarre, really talking about the nuts and bolts work of building and going school site by school site engagement with folks. And Junie Martinez, who's going to talk about how her district was really trying to roll them on this and kind of trying to implement this without them, and kind of the efforts and the energy that she's now putting in to really doing this. Each of these folks are local presidents or vice presidents. Each of them are playing a prominent role in this work. And each of them over a year ago were just like you, just really starting this process. And so with that, let me tell you last thing process-wise is that they're going to have a panel. After the panel, what we're going to do, that's really to show you what it looks like on the ground. After that, we're going to bring up Efrain Mercado, one of our staff members out of Sacramento, out of our GR building. And Efrain's going to go the nuts and bolts about what this looks like in the actual statutes and the regulations around this, so that you're armed with that information, so that when you go talk to your districts who have to apply, you're coming from a position of power. In fact, many of you on this call have far more information than the districts themselves have. So then we're going to have three parts actually. The first part is a panel. Second part, Efrain's going to go over the regs. And then the third part, we're going to break up and have you actually be kind of in similar or like groups. We'll have breakouts where you could kind of get some of your questions answered with some of the staff and some of the member leaders who have been part of this. I hope that makes sense. It looks like the issue with the Zoom has been fixed. Great work, staff. I'm working on that. So I see the numbers are going up still. And if you know people who are trying to get on and we're not able to, you can now tell them that there's space for them. Okay, so let me now go to Kyle Weinberg, who's going to talk about the work that's been going on in San Diego for a number of years around this community schools effort.
Thanks, David. Kyle Weinberg, Vice President, San Diego Education Association, proud member of our San Diego Community Schools Coalition. Want to start with talking about our coalition work. We, 3 years ago, did a series of forums on community schools because we knew that that was the direction we wanted to go to as a union, to build power and to build real meaningful relationships with community organizations and other unions through this work. And so we had the forums and found partners that wanted to be with us with the work.
I thought he was trying to get on.
Within that coalition, started advocating for the adoption of a school board resolution that would establish a process that would force the district to implement community schools in a way that we knew was aligned with the research, aligned with best practices, and was going to do the best to empower our families and our community allies. So once that community schools resolution was passed by our school board, that set in motion the process to develop the guidelines within our district for community school implementation. And within those guidelines are embedded the pillars and mechanisms that we know as CTA, as NEA, are essential for democratic community school implementation. So we spent 9 months as a community schools implementation team developing those guidelines. And then starting in this December, a month ago, we started meeting as our community schools advisory committee to oversee a democratic designation process of schools within our district that are at least 70% free and reduced price meals, that meet the criteria of having strong shared decision-making at their sites, have a vision for community partnerships, have a vision for community-based pedagogy, and a vision for strong partnerships with families and community allies. And so that application process is happening. Sites are submitting it. We've recruited 12 schools to submit applications. We've done application forums. We got the district to hire a community schools director position to support that process. And the deadlines are happening in February. And so we'll be doing the selection process in a democratic manner with this district-wide community schools advisory committee that has majority members of our coalition or allies of our community schools coalition to ensure that this implementation is happening in a way that aligns with our vision. And I do have visuals for this, so I'll drop those in the chat. They also have my email if anybody wants to reach out, wants support with building community labor coalitions, support with establishing district-wide and site-based shared decision-making bodies around community schools. Happy to help and so excited that we're embarking on this initiative as CTA with all the power of our organization and our allies behind it.
Thank you, Kyle. And now let's go to Rebecca Ledoux from Twin Rivers.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Ledoux. I'm president of Twin Rivers United Educators, and our union includes about 1,600 educators in the Twin Rivers Unified School District, and our district serves about 30,000 students in the North Sacramento, Del Paso Heights, and Rio Linda area. And if you live or you know the Sacramento region, you know that some of our most underserved and impoverished families live in our district. Community schools, where every student has access to the resources they need in and outside of the classroom, is part of our larger fight for justice. Educational justice, economic justice, racial justice, and social justice. When we first heard about community schools at TRU, we knew that developing them in equal partnership with educators, parents, and our broader community would only be successful if we leveraged our collective power in our union. With unprecedented funding on the table and educators on the front line providing the education every student deserves, even during a global pandemic, we're saying the time is now for transformational change in our schools. If parent and educator voices are not at the center of decisions being made, and if it's all left up to district administration, well, we know how that turns out. So at TRU, we have a contract expiring this year and we'll be negotiating our successor agreement. So we have a proposal for our district on how we can partner with them on community schools. And we plan to deliver proposals that embody the goals of community schools when we're at the bargaining table. We've woven in potential for parent partnerships and values-based proposals into our bargaining survey. This is an effort to surface ideas for how we can champion community schools in our contract bargaining to ensure that every true member's voice is heard. Our members have been loud and clear. Our students need more support in the classroom. We plan to fight for intervention specialists, counselors, social workers, and psychologists at every school. We plan to fight for smaller class sizes and more resources for our students. We've championed these concepts at school board forums and are rolling out a site-based conversation campaign with our strong site representatives this month. In our union and district, we saw clear opportunities to build on the work we're already doing for our contract campaign and in our relationship building with parents in our community. Our union is constantly building to be ready to take every necessary action for our students, all the way up to strike. We all know the best way to avoid a strike is to be ready for a strike. And coming up at Issues Conference, we'll spend more time talking about how we are weaving in community schools into our contract organizing campaign, and we hope to see you there for that discussion. My hope is to inspire others to see how the fight for community schools is accessible to all and complement and add to the work you're already doing and to help make our union stronger than ever. If anyone can lead the charge to create community schools across our state, it's educators working together, side by side, union strong. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca. And you can see how she's really bringing this kind of collective union power to the struggle of community schools by bringing it into bargaining. Great example. I appreciate that. Next, we want to go to David Navarre, who's actually doing that similar process, but in the process of really deeply engaging with his members at site. So David, why don't you take it away? Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, David. And I appreciate you having me here. My name is David Navarre. I'm president of Montebello Teachers Association. Our local association is approximately 1,200 members strong. And because of this, our work has to be intentional, strategic, and transparent. It is important that the foundational work of community schools is done well and that our messaging and positioning is clear. Last fall, we passed an educational justice resolution. Our association did. This resolution is important because it grounds the work that we do and keeps us focused on the ultimate goal, which is educational justice for our students and families. A public school system that gives every student the opportunity to succeed academically and in life, to achieve their dreams and to contribute to the well-being of the community and our society. The messaging is clear, and we often will reference this resolution in our everyday work. Here at Montebello, we have focused our early efforts on organizing and developing our members as organizers. Earlier in the year, we had a core group of about 15 member leaders attend the Jane McAlevey Community Schools Institute training. This core of passionate and emboldened leaders then set a new goal for themselves to recruit 2 members per building, 66 members, to attend a new organizing series of trainings. Recruitment started slow, built little by little, but it wasn't until we released members for 2 days to visit buildings and engage in one-on-one conversations with members that we saw the numbers grow. Our goal was 66. We now have 112 members signed up for our upcoming series of organizing training starting next week. Surpassing our goal was a direct result of our leaders having one-on-one conversations with members, engaging them with the issues that matter, and convincing individual members that they have the power to make the changes that they want to see. It's fascinating to see our leaders shine. Our dynamic organizing chair, Elizabeth Kacharian, has been able to make breakthroughs with a particularly challenging group of members. I'm sure you have a challenging group of members at your local. Our high school director, Lisa Quemada, is an amazing recruiter. She goes into buildings where there are no members signed up, fires folks up, and comes out with a list of names. Although organizing and those one-on-one conversations are the heart of the work, the details are so very important. When you have a member who is interested in the organizing training, you have to make it easy for them to make that firm commitment. Our office here developed a toolkit for our leaders that facilitates their work, and this toolkit is based on our educational justice resolution. It allows leaders to easily email the commitment form to members when they're ready to sign up. We do call it a commitment form because we are asking members to make a commitment to educational justice. The toolkit also keeps tracks of committed folks and documents the one-on-one conversations. Our strategy is to strengthen our base. I know that we are going to surpass our 112 number. We have been laser focused on this strategy, but I continue to speak to the board, the superintendent and his cabinet to make sure that at the very least, they understand where we, MTA, want to go. Ideally, they would be our partners in this work, and perhaps they will be. We are hopeful that they will be. But the stronger our base, the stronger our local is. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, David. That's really great examples about the real mechanics you all have really invested in about really making sure you're keeping track of all these incredible conversations, these one-on-ones. Appreciate all the work you all are doing. Let's now go to our last president to share that today before we go over the regulations, and that's Judy Martinez, who's from Central District in Fresno area. Judy, thank you, President Martinez.
Thank you, David Goldberg. I appreciate that. As David said, my name is Judy Martinez. I'm the president of Central Unified Teachers Association in Fresno, California. We're not even a city, we're just a district. That's how small we are. But we are 820 members strong. So our story is a little different than what you have heard from these amazing presidents so far. We just received the grant last year. And so a little nervous about all of it. Our goal within the grant was simply to do some long-term organizing and to strengthen and grow our chapter around bargaining and negotiations. We had a lot of people retire last year, as I'm sure many of you did also. And although it was only 36, it was a lot that impacted us, because a lot of those are very vocal, very strong leaders within our association. Several of them were site reps. Several of them were our committee chairs for our association. So this was going to be a rebuilding year for us. We also opened a new high school and a new online campus. And so with that comes new leadership. So a little nervous with, how to go about this with this rebuilding. So we attended numerous NEA trainings, wonderful trainings, including the Jane McAlevey that was referenced earlier. And we met with our district. We were keeping them informed along the way. They were aware of the grant, and we're every step of the way. So this is what we're doing. They were on board, but not a priority. Let me just say that. And we were educating our members, and the same with them. Really not a priority, not asking a lot of questions. When we told them we got the grant and we're working on a liaison and we're working on organizing, not a lot of questions. But I felt better about the process because in the trainings that we were going to, over and over and over again, this is what I heard. This is going to take time. It's not going to happen in a year. Give it 3 to 4 years, right? So I'm breathing a little easier. Okay, we can do this. We got this. Fast forward, we learn about the governor's budget. They've got $3 million allocated for community schools. And now everybody's talking about this. I get a call from our superintendent that she's meeting with the Glenn Price Group, Fresno County Office of Education, and she's asking our exec board to meet with them. Who is this Glenn Price Group? Apparently they work very closely with the California Department of Education, and they do successful grant writing, and they're willing to author the district's work when they get there. Okay, so at this point, I'm seeing many red flags, or we are, I should say, because this went against everything that I had learned about community schools. Where's the meaningful engagement? I'm asking myself, where's the collaboration and the stakeholders? Where are they? So we agreed to meet with the district, and I'm glad we did. And I probably should mention that we do have a pretty good relationship with our district. We do work collaboratively, but this was a huge red flag, like I said. They agreed, yes, Judy, You are right. This is not how it should be. However, there's money on the table, and we've got to fill out these forms. They're saying we've got to write this grant if we're going to get this money. And of course, there are timelines. So that's where we're at. And those 3 to 4 years, that's not going to happen because we are here right now, but we are committed, and the district is committed to make this happen. So I'm so happy to hear the stories that the other 3 chapters shared with us, because we're going to be there sooner than later, and a lot sooner than we had hoped. But thankfully, we have had numerous support from NEA and from CTA. So for those of you just starting out, don't be scared. We can do this, and CTA and NEA have our back. So thank you.
Thank you, Judy. I really appreciate you. And as Judy said, we're going to now transition into Efrain, who's going to go over the regs. And part of the reason we're doing that is to really highlighting Judy's experience, where we expect many of you all will get a call at some point where your superintendent just says, oh yeah, I decided to apply for this, and here's a community school I've already identified. And that's where you all need to say, no, that's not how we're doing this. Here's the regs. Here's how we're going to do this. Here's how we're going to democratically bring up and make this a democratic process where we're connected together, district. And this is the meetings that we're also going to start having with the community as a union to really bring that power to make that, so you can actually put pressure on the district. This money is an unprecedented amount of money. A lot of districts are going to scramble for it. And that's why we have to be prepared and be ready. So let me go to Efrain now. If you have questions for Efrain, while you can put them in the chat there, and we will try to respond to them at some point, either right now, after we'll have a little Q&A, and if not, we're also going to save the questions as well and figure out how we process and get answers to you. So let me now bring to our staff member from our GR department, Efrain Mercado.
Thank you, David. I'm going to share my screen and bring up my super fancy PowerPoint. Hope folks can see it. A couple of caveats to David and everyone's point. This program is huge, tons of money involved. There's also a ton of moving parts, and that's something just to keep in mind. There's a lot going on. This is a big play for a lot of different folks in our state, so just keep that in mind. There will be some things, I'll make sure to highlight what's firm and what's fuzzy, just to make sure we're all on the same page, because there's some pieces of information I'm going to share that are firm and like, hey, we know this is going to be the way it's going to be, and some pieces will be fuzzy, and I'll just make sure to call that out. Just so you know, also, like Toby and everyone said earlier, this came through the budget process. There's been a lot of work done on this at the November state board meeting, a lot of work done by the CDE, a lot of different pieces going on. And most recently at the January 12th state board meeting, the state board adopted the revised administrative plan for the California Community Schools, I always put the first P, partnership program, there we go. And they also approved the framework, and I'll explain why that's important. There's a lot of terms that you're going to hear, so I just want to kind of brief everyone quickly. You're going to hear about planning grants, and you're going to hear about implementation grants. Those are 2 different things. I'm going to focus more time on planning grants because that's where most of our locals will be, meaning that they do not have existing community schools. There will be overlap because a lot of the time frames and requirements and the qualifying pieces for planning and for implementation grants are the same. So you'll see on the slide a little bit of overlapping information. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on that piece. The first piece I'm calling up right now for the planning grants, again, those will go to the qualifying entities, which are the LEAs, without existing community schools. In this scenario, folks are going to have access to $200,000 for the entire LEA that can be used in 2022 or 2023. There will be an opportunity if folks do not apply in round 1, which is the round 1 is the one coming up, the window coming up quickly. There will be a round 2, and those dates have not been defined yet. So if your district and your local need more time to kind of set the groundwork, you will have a second bite at the apple for that. My guess is a lot of folks will try to get in this first round just because people want the money, and they'll go from there. There is going to be a matching requirement for the LEA of 1/3. So if you get the $200,000 grant, the 1/3 amount of 6,000-7,000 ish, that is firm. So just understand that the 1/3 is firm. The fuzzy part right now is what will be allowed to qualify as matching. More than likely, there will be flexibility around that, but that is not currently written out in stone. That'll be outlined in the RFA when that comes out, and I will hit on when that's coming out very soon. Another piece that's really important to keep in mind is that the CDE must reserve funding for implementation grants for every single LEA that receives a planning grant. So if you get a planning grant, they have to reserve funds for 5 years for the implementation grant. And it's not automatic that you'll get those funds, but as long as you do what they, the accountability pieces and you do what you say you're going to do, then folks will do their transition there. So just keep that in mind, really important. That last bullet on the screen, some pieces to really highlight to David and everyone's point earlier, what that money can be used for. The application and the different framework pieces will not specify exactly what it has to be used for, but it will call out certain practices, and I'll show that later on, that are like hiring a community schools coordinator for the LEA, establishing your district steering committee for shared decision-making processes, and then facilitating the needs and asset mapping pieces. Within the structure, those kind of components will be prioritized and will be lifted up. And what we're trying to get our locals to do as well is when you're having these discussions, because it's in writing in the framework, and I'll show you that a little bit later on, to really push hard for these things because it is called out. So let's push really hard on these pieces. So that's kind of the high level planning grant piece. I'm going to
Efrain,
move
can I say
forward.
something real quickly?
Oh yeah, of course.
Dave, Efrain, maybe as you go through it the first time, could you, like when you get to LEA, can you say what LEA is or CDE is?
Oh.
Just for folks for the first time, maybe seeing some of these. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. I knew Monica put that in my notes for a reason. I should have just listened to her. The LEA is a local educational agency, which is the equivalent of the district. So that can be in our state, it's a county office, a district, or a charter school. For most of our local, it's going to be the district. The CDE is the California Department of Education, and they're the state agency that is going to be administering the funds and running the program. Thank you for that reminder. I'm going to touch quickly on this. Again, implementation grants, if you're talking about the dollar amounts associated with it, that's more the eye-popping kind of dollar amounts that people get really excited about. And most of your CBOs at the district will really want to get hot on this money. But that's for establishing new community schools, expanding your community schools, or continuing in community schools. In this first round of implementation grants, there will be very few LEAs or districts who are eligible to even apply for it. And that's going to be folks who have already been doing community schools work and up to a certain threshold. So just keep that in mind. If you're one of the ones that fall into that category, like some of the examples of that are like LAUSD, Oakland, I think Anaheim also fall into that. There are folks who do fall into that category. They will also have the LEA matching requirement of 1/3. Obviously, with bigger amounts of money, there's the 1/3 amount that gets a little bit higher there. And then to call out, the language is very specific to the fact that it's up to $500,000 per school site, but do not expect $500,000 more. The range will be more in the $250,000, $300,000, $350,000 range for most schools. So just keep that in mind as you're going through. And if you have questions about which one you guys should be going for, I'm sure that Monica and her team will help facilitate that during the breakout. One piece to highlight that was approved at the state board recently are the 4 bands of the amount of students that count for implementation grants. So just clear on that, implementation grants. So this kind of speaks to the point of when they say up to 500,000, the only folks who are going to qualify for that more than likely are going to be the super large schools, the 2,001 students or more, and the ones that have the most need. So just keep that piece in mind. The majority of schools, whether they're small, medium, large, will probably be in the 250, 300, 350 range. And again, that right there is fuzzy, it's not firm yet. So just as that becomes firm, we'll make sure to push the information out. And I can't really monitor the chat, so if there are questions, please just holler at me and stop me, please. These next dates are really important, and you're going to see language in here. And you're probably kind of like, oh my gosh, this is right around the corner. And this is for both implementation and planning grants. But again, the vast majority of folks on this call will likely be going for planning grants. The RFAs will be released in February 2022. Good news and bad news. February is the shortest month. That's only 28 days. Bad news is they haven't clarified whether that's early Feb, mid Feb, late Feb. Based off our discussions, like kind of the back channel stuff, more than likely it's going to happen mid February, perhaps late February. Part of that is there's so many moving parts and so many things that have to be worked out that they're going to need time for it. The catch here is that the due date for the grant applications is more than likely, and again, likely because it's fuzzy, will be late March, early April. And we know that because the grant awards must be approved by the state board at their May 2022 meeting. So just to kind of quickly recap that. Yep, your question?
What's an RFA?
Oh, the request for application. Sorry, David reminded me, I still forgot. My apologies. The request for your application, essentially it's going to be the grant application. When it comes out and they say, hey, who wants to apply for this money? That's going to be the RFA. Thank you for that question, the reminder. So again, the state board meeting is going to be May 18th and May 19th per Bagley-King public and the public meetings law. They have to post their agenda by, I think, May 8th. And then the thinking is that the CDE is going to need probably a little over a month to receive the applications, review the applications, make recommendations to approve. Therefore, that's where we land on the late March, early April. And again, some of our discussions offline have also led us to that date range. But just keep in mind, again, that's likely it's a fuzzy range. And as soon as we get more firm dates, we'll let you know. But given the fuzziness here, you're looking at anywhere between 4 weeks to 6 weeks potentially to turn this around once you have the information, which we all know is not a ton of time. So the more prep that your local is on this front, the better off. And I think to David's point earlier, most of the districts in the state aren't too up to date on this. So if your local is up to date and has the information quickly, you're going to be ahead and hopefully able to drive the discussion. All right, another piece here that I just want to make sure we flag this, and this is one of those, it could be a pro, it could be a con, depending on relationships locally and all that. It has been stated that they want to keep the application forms for the planning grants simple. And I put simple in air quotes because how simple can something be for $200,000? The reality is they want to make it as easy as possible for as many of the qualifying entities or the eligible LEAs to receive this funding. So they want to have a low threshold for receiving the funds. Now, just so you know, because CTA takes community schools very seriously, and we believe that it needs to be transformative in all the pillars, simple can be a problem in some ways because simple means a lot of folks will apply even if they're not prepared or ready to actually do this work right. At the same time, given the truncated timelines, CDE is trying to think about kind of the bureaucracy pieces of how do we do this in a manner in which we can turn these around quickly so folks can get to the work as soon as possible. So there's give and take on this issue, and some of it's positive, some of it's negative, but the idea is there will be a real threshold for folks to receive the funds on the planning grants. All that to say, for the planning grants to then transition to implementation grants in a year from now, there will be threshold requirements that have to be met locally to then transition to those bigger dollar amounts. So I could jump over on that one. Again, questions, please let me know. This slide right here has a ton of verbiage on it. And the only reason why I did that is I didn't want to try to paraphrase this information because it is very important. And this is pulled directly from the CDE State Board materials. The folks who are, there are eligible entities who can get this money, okay? And there are limitations and there are pieces here. The eligible entities are going to be the LEAs, again, the school district's charter school or county office of education, based off the following requirements. And additionally, just keep this in mind, it's really important. If your LEA does not meet the threshold requirements to qualify, but an individual school does, then the LEA can then apply on behalf of the school to get access to this money, which is super important. There are some districts who don't meet the 50% unduplicated pupil percentage, but they have schools that do. Therefore, the LEA can apply on behalf of those schools. So keep that piece in mind, please. Another piece here, the eligible entities can include LEAs in partnership with county behavioral health, federal Head Start, early Head Start program, and government funded early childhood. I think the reality here is we probably won't see a whole lot of this happening on the front end application just because the timeframes will be so tight to turn it around. But you'll probably see a lot more partnership and cooperation amongst these agencies as the work begins to roll out. So that's not a hard and fast rule, but that's probably what we're going to see just given the timeframe. This next piece, so these are the qualifying, the qualifiers for the LEAs to go after these grants. The 50% or more of the enrolled pupils of the educational agency are uneducated pupils. The LEA has higher than state average dropout rates. The LEA has higher than state average suspension and expulsion, or they have higher state average rates of child homelessness, foster youth, justice involved youth. The most straightforward criteria, obviously, is the 50% or more. Most districts know that right off the top of their heads if they are or not. And also for schools, most folks know right away if they are or not. If for some reason you do not qualify under the 50% of enrolled pupils are unduplicated, so 3 reduced lunch, English learner, foster youth, homeless, quickly pivot to see where your stats are for dropout, suspension, expulsion to kind of get a feel, can we qualify under that different threshold criteria? And if you need help with that, please just, I'm going to say let us know. I'm going to volunteer myself, but I'm not sure how I can help do that. But yeah, anyway. Next piece. The demonstrated need, and this goes to once they receive the grant application, the demonstrated need is going to help drive the priorities as people come into play. Now, the reality is this is a ton of money. It's a big pot of money. So especially on the planning grants, the priorities won't come into play as much because there's a lot of money out there and it likely will not be oversubscribed. But when we do implementation grants, this will likely come into play because that will likely become, depending on the number of planning grants, it could become oversubscribed eventually. So let's keep that in mind. And these pieces here are if you're serving pupils in a high poverty school with at least 80% of unduplicated free reduced price meals. If you have a demonstrated need to expand access to integrated services, including those impacted by COVID-19, and applicants serving small and rural schools. So keep that in mind that these folks will get priority amongst the funding. This will likely come into play a little bit more in implementation grants than the planning grants, but just keep that in mind. And then this piece is super important because to David's point earlier about power, I think the parts that I've bolded, that they're bolded by myself, they weren't bolded in the document. I think that these bolded pieces give us power when we're talking to our districts about how to approach this work. So in addition to demonstrating need, if your planning grant applicants have the following elements in place, they will be given priority. So to me, the talking point here is if the applicant involves pupils, parents, certificated, classified, and cooperating agency personnel in the process of identifying the needs of pupils and everything, that essentially is highlighting our push for the district level steering committee and the democratic approach to decision making. And we have it in writing saying that, hey, you need to do this, and this gives you priority. And play it as this will make the district look good in their application, so we must do this and get the priority for our funding. I'm not going to drill too deep into the other priorities because it's all on the slide and we will share this with you. I did want to highlight one more piece, and this is part 2 of the slide here. Another one here is the applicant to identify a cooperating agency collaboration process, co-signatories, a mechanism for sharing governance, and for integrating and redirecting existing resources and other school support services. Again, we have it in writing the opportunity to show the power of our steering committees, of our democratic decision-making, the shared decision-making model. So we have the ability to use this as a pivot point with our districts to get this done. And if folks have questions, please, again, throw them in the chat and we can answer those as soon as possible. This next part there's a lot of information with it. I'm not going to go through every piece just because we don't have time for it. But I just want to say, the community schools framework that was adopted by the state board at the January meeting, that is supposed to be the driver of the RFAs, the driver of the applications, the driver of the work, the driver of the implementation of how all this is going to work. we obviously were involved with helping to develop and give feedback and do all those pieces. Some of the folks that we work with that are, tried and true on community schooling, believe that the framework is very powerful, which is awesome. I will say there are some things in which the community, the framework, and I'll just move ahead and kind of just show it. There are, within the California Community Schools Framework, there are 4 pillars. I know for some of the NEA CTA work, we have the 6 pillars, and some districts have the 8 pillars and all those things. I think when it comes down to it, from discussions that we've had, the difference between the 4 pillars here on the page versus the 6, they all kind of fit into each other. So it's all pretty close there. So they're not like super off in different worlds. But if we ever have issues with our districts in terms of doing the right thing and making sure that we're sharing the leadership and sharing what's happening, just go back to these pillars, hit the pillars back up, and just make sure that they know, hey, this is what we're supposed to be doing here. Collaborative leadership, collective trust, shared responsibility to get this work done. So I just wanted to highlight that. Another key component here are the key conditions for learning. So making sure that we're using this as kind of a drumbeat to say, this is why we need to do the work in this way. This is why you're listening to educators. This is why we're front and center in the work as we're moving forward with the community, with students, with parents, everyone across the board. And again, you'll have access to this PowerPoint, so don't worry about trying to catch everything. But the cornerstone commitments, again, within the RFA and the application, the districts who are applying for planning and implementation grants, they are making commitments to doing these things. So how do we then leverage these commitments to saying, this is why we have to do X, Y, Z. This is why we have to be in the middle of everything. And that 4th bullet, again, to David's point, shared decision-making and participatory practices, and how does that play out? Locally, the fight's going to be there, and that's going to be where we are fighting for our educators and for our students across the board. The proven practices, again, this is some of the guidance that we're having here. The asset mapping gap analysis, which is very powerful. Now, we obviously would like that to go to the next level as well, not just doing the typical asset mapping gap analysis, but doing that with 75% of involvement of our students, 75% at least involvement of our parents and guardians, of our educators, et cetera. But again, this gives us the support and foundation for our work. The community schools coordinator is called out as a proven practice, so therefore the district should be doing that for the schools of the district. Site-based LEA-based advisory councils. So it's being called out as all these things that should be done. If your district pushes back saying, hey, it's not required, that the pushback should immediately be, no, this is the proven practice. This is the framework. We need to do this. Same idea on the relevant programs. Lastly, and then we'll go do questions. I'm taking this slide. This slide was pulled directly from the CDE presentation at the state board, and I'm doing this to illustrate the idea of there's a ton of moving parts and there's a ton that's still really fuzzy. And this is everything that's a part of that, the fuzziness. So the CDE is still trying to do outreach and information sharing and trust us that we're a part of that process and getting the information out there. They want to make sure they want as many LEAs who are eligible to be applying for their planning grants, which again, there are pros and cons to that. It gets money out the door, but there will be LEAs and districts who aren't ready for this work that will get the money and start going. So we have to make sure that we're diligent locally to get it done. And then all the pieces around grant allocations, accountability, the statewide advisory council, youth engagement, and the TA system. I haven't even spoken to the TA centers today, just because we're focusing on the planning grants mostly and then a little on the implementation. But we could have a whole 2-hour meeting on just the TA system, which I'm not going to bore you with now. That's it for me. Folks have questions, David or Monica, anything I missed that you want to hit up or talk about, please help me out, and I'm going to stop my share now.
Yeah, Efrain, I'm not really, it seems like some of the questions being answered in there. I see one, what's the TA system? Maybe you want to go over that whole infrastructure, Efrain?
Yeah, so the TA system, what a part of the funding that has been given by the state is part of the funding for all the grants to the LEAs and to the schools, obviously, but part of it's being carved out for the technical assistance centers, in which they're going to, as a state, identify a lead TA center that is going to be charged with being obviously a community schools expert, implementation expert. Sorry, TA is technical assistance. I'm sorry. the technical assistance groups. And it's going to be an LEA partnering with higher education groups, partnering with some nonprofits that will help to develop the content that then supports the districts and the schools as they're doing this. So there's going to be a lead TA center, and then down the road, 6 to 9 months to add on regional TA centers, which will be focused more regionally in Los Angeles, Central Valley, et cetera. And there's more on that. If folks want to dig in, let me know. We can have an offline call.
Right. So Efrain, I think the big picture that Efrain's put out there is that there is an unprecedented amount of money. There's a lot of folks who still are, there's a lot of lack of clarity still. And it's a very quick moving process that's being driven by some political concerns about really getting out the money quickly, right? And so I think that that's a recipe for some challenges, and it's not challenges that we're not used to. We've seen this before. Appreciate you all spending time this afternoon, evening, doing this. You can see it turned dark outside my window here. That means it's nighttime. It's time to go to sleep. But I do want to tell you just a little follow-up things that we can. One is that we're going to put in the chat right here a survey or a kind of where you can get some responses about what you thought of tonight. We're also going to email that out along with, I think, the slides and even the first part of the video. But that'll really help us to think about how to best move this forward with you, what kind of support you need moving forward. This is really, as we said, the whole community schools project is bottom up, including these trainings. We want to really kind of see how to be the most supportive of what you have going on. We're also gonna, if for those people who want to know more about it, there is an NEA Institute on community schools that includes some coaching around this. We may have a follow-up meeting with some of them to explore how to get, see if there's more room for folks in there, or if not, how we can kind of modify that to include a big group of our people, given that we have so many people in California considering this. Also, if you're in particular, there's going to be a particular priority for rural schools. So if you are a rural school, please do hit us up as well, because we may have to, there's some incredible articles on our website about the way community schools can play out particularly well in rural schools, but also means some different kind of support. And so if that's something that you need, that's something to also indicate in the survey. Any follow-up you want, you could send it to the Human Rights Department. So it's Human Rights, DEPT, DEEP at CTA.org. You can also email me, dgoldberg@cta.org, or Monica Tamarath, who's here, mtamarath at cta.org. We're prepared to follow up. We know this is a process. We hope you're leaving tonight really not feeling like you're going to be caught off guard by your district, and that you actually can maybe start to think about how we do some more deeper organizing with our members initially, and then hopefully with the community as a next step. Appreciate you all being here. Great seeing such amazing organizers. Thank you for the folks who led. I'm seeing Aisha on my screen now, and others who led the breakout groups. Really great conversations that went on there. All right, folks. Have a great night.